The soft golden light from the crystal chandeliers reflected on the polished walnut floors of Maison de Lumière, a place where the city's powerful and wealthy gathered every night. And in the midst of all that elegance, Emily Smith moved silently, like a shadow. Each evening, she worked no less than 12 hours, moving from table to table with a tray of wine in her hands, the same tired smile stretched across her lips. No one knew her name. To the guests, she was just another server. To the manager, she was the easiest one to order around. To her coworkers, she was the girl who always took extra shifts and never said no. But behind the uniform, behind the polite smile, there was another reality. Her mother was fighting cancer. Day by day, through rounds of chemotherapy and hospital bills that grew heavier than she could afford. Emily had no time for herself. She didn't go to college, never took a night off, had no social life. Only shifts, short sleep, and quiet sighs in the dark. She didn't complain. No one ever saw her cry. But each night, when she stood alone behind the bar after midnight, her eyes always drifted somewhere far away, to a small rented room where her mother lay in silence, waiting for her daughter to come home. Emily never dreamed extravagantly. Her only wish, simple, desperate, was for her mother to live one more day. That evening, like most nights, Maison de Lumière was packed. The lights glowed brightly, the soft clinking of silverware echoing beneath the hum of upper-class conversations. Emily moved briskly across the grand hall, a tray of 4 wine glasses carefully balanced in her hand. Then, a slight slip. Her heel caught on the new carpet laid down that morning. Everything happened in seconds. The tray tilted, and the crystal glasses shattered against the hardwood floor with a sharp, unforgiving crash. Silence fell. Emily froze, her cheeks burning. She dropped to her knees to collect the broken shards, hands trembling, panic tightening around her throat. "Do you think this is a street market?" came a voice sharp and cruel. Mr. Halverson, the restaurant manager. "People like you don't belong here. You've embarrassed this establishment." Heads turned. A few customers frowned. Some chuckled. No one spoke up. Emily kept her eyes down, wishing she could vanish. And then a voice rang out, low, firm, and undeniably powerful. "That's enough." Every head turned. A man rose from the VIP table nearby. Julian Blackwood, charcoal suit tailored to precision, steel gray eyes unreadable. The man who owned this restaurant and a dozen more across the country. He looked directly at Halverson. "You just humiliated an employee in front of a full house, in front of me." Halverson stammered. "Sir? I was only—" "You just humiliated an employee in front of our guests," Julian said coldly. "We'll talk upstairs. For now, step away from the floor." "You're suspended." Emily remained on her knees, fingers still curled around the pieces of broken glass. She slowly looked up and met the gaze of the man who had just changed her night, perhaps even her life. Emily stood frozen, barely daring to breathe. She remained kneeling as Halverson left, her back stiff, eyes fixed on the floor. Julian Blackwood said nothing more. He glanced at her, an unreadable look, then turned away, leaving the entire restaurant in hushed confusion. She had no idea what had just happened, no idea why someone like him had stepped in for her, a nameless waitress in the vastness of this city. The next morning, when Emily returned to the restaurant to hand in her resignation, she was called upstairs to the executive office. The room sat high above the city, its glass walls bathed in the early light of New York. Julian stood with his back to her, looking down at the streets below. The space was silent, tense. "You're Emily Smith," he said without turning. "I want to know why someone who's endured that much would still choose to stay." Emily didn't know how to answer. She didn't mention her mother's illness, didn't explain the exhaustion. She simply replied softly, "Because I don't have another option." Julian turned. His eyes were sharp but not cold. He looked at her as if weighing something deeper than her job title. No one should work in a place where people are treated like objects. he said. I own another restaurant, the Glass House. You'll work there, not as a server. Emily blinked, stunned. Then, what would I be doing? Trial position, pastry kitchen. 3 months. If it doesn't fit, you walk away. She hesitated. Why me? His voice lowered. Because you caught my attention. And I rarely notice anyone. She hesitated, then nodded. Not because she trusted him, but because at that moment, it was the only light she could see in a long, dark tunnel. She had no idea that this decision would open the door to a life she never imagined. The first week at the Glass House felt like stepping into a different universe. Everything here was perfect to the point of being sterile. Cutlery aligned with precision, kitchens gleaming like showrooms, and the air always taut with discipline. Emily wore the crisp white uniform of a pastry assistant and started from the ground up, measuring ingredients, whipping cream to peaks, learning to bake an even tart shell. She was always the first to arrive and the last to leave, her hands marked with tiny burns, her shoulders perpetually sore. Julian didn't interfere with daily operations, but he was always there, standing silently in the corner, watching everything. No one spoke much when he was present. He rarely said a word, but his eyes always seemed to say more than his mouth ever did. One night after closing, Emily collapsed onto a bench in the cold prep room, surrounded by the scent of vanilla and butter. Most of the staff had left, and the kitchen lights were dimmed. She didn't know Julian was still there. Sitting like that will hurt your back, his voice echoed from the doorway, calm and even. Emily jolted upright. I'm sorry. I just needed a minute. Julian stepped in, his coat draped over one arm. His expression was softer than usual. What are you working on? He asked, glancing at the half-open recipe book beside her. Passion fruit mousse, but I didn't get the gelatin right. Julian picked up the book, flipping through a few pages. I used to think dessert was a luxury, until I saw someone turn it into memory. He looked up at her, and for the first time, his gaze wasn't just analytical, it was human. Tomorrow, 3 p.m., make me a dessert. Anything that makes me remember you. Emily blinked. You mean anything at all? Julian nodded. Something imperfect, but honest. I want to taste that. The next afternoon, right at 3 p.m., Emily stood alone in the pastry kitchen of the Glass House. She had been up since dawn, flipping through old recipes, weighing every ingredient carefully before choosing the one she knew best, lemon tart. It was the dessert her mother used to make on the worst days. A little tartness reminds you that life isn't always sweet, her mother would say, but if you find the balance, even the sour moments can become unforgettable. Emily prepared the crust with care, baking it to a perfect golden hue. She whisked the lemon curd until it was smooth and added a touch of zest for brightness. Her hands trembled slightly as she placed the tart on a simple white plate. Nothing extravagant, but full of memory. Julian walked in right on time. He was in his usual sharp suit, his expression calm, but something in his eyes had softened. Emily pushed the plate toward him. This is my choice. Julian looked at the tart for a moment before picking up a fork. He sliced a small piece and tasted it. The kitchen went still. He didn't smile. He didn't frown. He simply looked at her longer than usual, as if he was tasting not just the dessert, but the person behind it. Why a lemon tart? He asked. Emily clasped her hands. Because it reminds me of my mother. She used to say life is bittersweet, and if you learn how, even pain can become something beautiful. Julian was silent. Then he set the fork down, folded his arms, and in his eyes was something rare. Trust. I'm opening a new restaurant in Miami, and I need a head pastry chef. Emily's eyes widened. You mean me? Julian nodded. Not a trainee, a leader. A week later, Emily arrived at Stella Maris, the upscale restaurant Julian was preparing to launch in Miami. She had never gotten used to flying first class or being served with such polished professionalism. Everything made her feel as though she'd stepped into a world that didn't belong to her. But she didn't have much time to dwell on it. From the moment she arrived, the work swept her into its whirlwind. Julian oversaw everything with meticulous precision. He wasn't just the investor, he was someone who knew every corner of the restaurant by heart, from the way the lighting hit each table to the subtle scent that lingered in the air. It also meant he was always present. They worked side by side constantly, discussing menus, debating dessert presentations. At first, every conversation between them was strictly business. But slowly, things began to shift. Emily started to see a different side of Julian, not just the cold, decisive businessman, but the person behind the facade. In the kitchen, away from investors and executive chefs, he revealed something real, something almost vulnerable. One late night, after all the staff had gone home, Emily stayed behind to test a new recipe. Julian walked in, his jacket off, sleeves rolled up. "You're still here?" he asked, leaning against the counter, watching her knead the dough. She smiled. "I'm trying a new recipe, sea salt caramel chocolate tart. Want a taste?" He raised an eyebrow, then scooped up a bit of the filling with a spoon. Silence. Emily held her breath. Finally, he nodded. "Perfect." She exhaled. "Really?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he gently brushed a streak of flour from her cheek. For a moment, time stood still. Their eyes met. Quiet, but full of unspoken things. Then Julian stepped back, his voice calm again. "Don't overwork yourself. Get some rest, Emily." But as he walked out of the kitchen, Emily knew something had changed. Julian Blackwood had always been a man in control, but just as Emily thought she was beginning to understand him, he suddenly pulled away. It all started after one particular evening when a special guest visited the restaurant. Alina Monroe, a well-known figure in the hospitality industry, and, as Emily would later find out, someone from Julian's past. She didn't know the full story between them, but she could see the shift in Julian. His gaze turned colder, his usual calm now a wall that couldn't be breached. That night, after the restaurant had closed, Emily found him alone on the balcony, a glass of whiskey in hand. "Are you okay?" she asked, approaching slowly. Julian gave a dry, humorless smile. "I'm always okay." Emily crossed her arms. "Who is Alina?" He stayed quiet for a while, then exhaled. "She was once my fiancée." Emily froze. Julian swirled his drink. "She loved the image I represented, not the real man behind it. And when I stopped being the perfect choice in her eyes, she left, without hesitation." Emily didn't know what to say. "The worst part," Julian continued, "wasn't losing her. It was letting that betrayal make me stop believing in people." She didn't reply with words. Instead, she gently placed her hand over his, still clenched around the glass. Julian looked at her for a long moment, then whispered, "I don't want to make that mistake again, Emily." She wasn't sure if he meant Alina or the two of them. But for the first time, Julian had let her see the man behind the mask. 3 days after that conversation, Emily noticed Julian growing distant again. He still came to the kitchen, still watched her work, but the quiet moments between them were now filled with hesitation. She understood why. Julian was afraid of closeness, afraid to trust, afraid that letting someone into his world would only lead to being abandoned again, just like Alina had done. But Emily wasn't Alina, and she needed him to know that. That evening, after a long day at the restaurant, she found Julian standing alone on the beach, just beyond where the city lights faded. She walked toward him, her bare feet sinking lightly into the sand. "Are you planning to avoid me forever?" Julian didn't turn immediately, but his voice was soft. "I'm not avoiding you." Emily raised an eyebrow. "Really? You've been a ghost for 3 days?" He sighed, then finally turned. In the moonlight, his eyes had softened, no longer the sharp stare of a powerful businessman. "Emily," he hesitated, as if searching for the right words. She stepped closer, heart pounding. "You're about to say we shouldn't do this, aren't you?" Julian looked at her and then, unexpectedly, laughed. A rare, genuine laugh. I think it's a little too late to stop now. Before she could respond, he reached out and touched her cheek. I kept telling myself not to get too close, he murmured, but then I started seeing you everywhere. In the kitchen, in your creativity, in the way you bring everything to life. Her breath caught, heart fluttering. Then stop fighting it, she whispered. Julian looked at her for a long moment before lowering his head and pressing a gentle kiss to her lips. It wasn't rushed or passionate. It was a quiet confession, a promise that he was finally ready to trust again. Beneath the starry sky, Emily knew this wasn't just a fleeting moment. It was the beginning of something real. The next morning, Emily arrived in the kitchen earlier than usual, but this time, something was different. Everything had changed after the night before. Not just because of the kiss under the starlit sky, but because Julian had finally let her into his world. She was checking the oven when a familiar voice sounded behind her. "Hope you're not planning to avoid me after last night." Emily turned around to find Julian's rare, mischievous gaze meeting hers. She smiled. "I think I couldn't even if I wanted to." He stepped closer, no longer hiding anything between them. "Good, because I made dinner reservations for us tonight. Not as boss and employee, just Julian and Emily." Her heart pounded faster. This wasn't just a dinner, it was a declaration. But before she could reply, a staff member burst into the kitchen, looking uneasy. "Mr. Blackwood, there are reporters asking about your relationship with Miss Emily. Someone must have leaked the information." Julian sighed, but he didn't flinch. He turned to Emily, eyes unwavering. Maybe it's time the world knew the truth. Emily took his hand, a soft smile playing on her lips, and she knew this was only the beginning. When the last employee left and the restaurant doors closed, it was just Emily and Julian, bathed in the soft flicker of candlelight. Emily removed her apron and glanced around. The kitchen was spotless, but the dining area stood empty. She frowned slightly. "You said you booked a table, but where is it?" Julian leaned casually against the bar, a trace of a smile at the corner of his mouth. "We're going to set it ourselves." Emily blinked. "You want to set the table yourself?" He shrugged, rolling up the sleeves of his crisp white shirt. "I figured it was time to try something different." For the first time, they were no longer chef and restaurant owner, no longer employee and powerful businessman. Tonight, they were simply two people creating something meaningful together. They set a table in the center of the restaurant, where city lights shimmered through the tall glass windows. Emily carefully laid a cream-colored tablecloth, smoothing out each fold. Julian placed white candles with precision, their tiny flames flickering warmly. "You're surprisingly good at this," Emily teased, watching him align the glasses perfectly. He glanced at her, eyes glinting. "I'm very good at organizing things, you know that." She laughed, but her heart fluttered, because this moment felt different. Once everything was in place, Julian poured the wine and pulled out her chair. "Perfect," he whispered, eyes never leaving her. They dined, talking about the little things. Emily's disastrous attempts at baking classes, Julian's first time cooking and forgetting to turn on the stove. When the dinner neared its end, Emily started to get up to clear the table, but Julian gently held her hand. "Wait," he said, eyes deep with something unspoken. She watched as he disappeared into the kitchen. A few moments later, he returned, holding a lemon tart, her absolute favorite dessert. You made this?" Emily stared in disbelief. Julian looked slightly sheepish, though he tried to hide it. "I've been practicing all week. Not sure it matches yours." She smiled, heart softening. Julian Blackwood, the man who once signed million-dollar deals, had now stepped into the kitchen for her. But before she could say anything, he did something that took her breath away. He knelt before her and pulled a small velvet box from his pocket. "Emily, I didn't believe in love anymore. Until you. You came in like a storm, unexpected, impossible to ignore. And suddenly, I wanted everything I told myself I couldn't have. He opened the box, revealing a sparkling diamond ring. I can't imagine my life without you. Emily Smith. Will you marry me? Tears welled in her eyes, streaming down her cheeks before she could stop them. She smiled, her voice trembling with joy. Yes, Julian, 1,000 times yes. He stood and pulled her into his arms. They kissed, and everything else melted away, leaving only the sound of their hearts, beating as one in the perfect harmony of love.